Today I'm going to present some results of my study project that I did in this year. I dealt with the patterns of anadromy around the German Baltic waters, and yeah, I'm a master student of the Humboldt University actually. So just to give you some facts on the state of the art, there is a sympatric population of pike living in the Baltic lagoons. We have brackish spawners and we have anadromous spawners. And they live in the Baltic areas together throughout most of the year, but then when it comes to spring, the anadromous populations go into freshwater and they reproduce in isolation. In addition to that, we also do have some freshwater residents that may occasionally stray into the bottoms to feed and that we might encounter there. This anadromous pattern or this anadromous ecotype has been confirmed from different areas from the Baltic Sea. However, there are quite striking differences between the ratio of anadromous to Baltic spawners. And for example, Meis Rothler reported that almost all of the pike living in Estonian coastal waters are actually born in freshwater and then move into the Baltic Sea. While in Germany, the importance of this freshwater spawning, according to otolith studies, is rather small, and we only have about 6% of our stocks living in the coastal waters born in freshwater. Potential reasons for these differences are, it has been hypothesized that freshwater could have to do with this ratio. So the more freshwater there is, the more possibility for large anadromous stocks there is. Also, something that Robert has stressed on Tuesday already is that if we look at the study sites of different otolith studies, then we see kind of a good correlation between salinity and increasing abundance of brackish spawners. However, it could also be that this is just an effect of temperature with higher latitudes, and then the importance of earlier spawning of small watersheds is more important in high latitudes. So overall, we can say that we don't really know why these differences exist. Now we switch to my study area. You've probably seen this graph already a couple of times. In the middle, we have the island of Rügen, and then the red ones are the lagoon systems. Color indicates salinity, so we have quite different salinity regimes. And overall, we have relatively few major rivers, which you can also see. Something that is important to know about this area is that there was the so-called melioration period between the 60s and the 90s taking place, where one tried to really maximize agricultural production by all means. And what happened here is most of the coastal wetlands were drained and so-called pumping stations were created. So now you should see these black dots on the map, and those are the locations of so-called pump sheds or pumping stations. And they basically drain the inland and pump the fresh water into the bottom lagoons and thereby block the access of fish to enter these waters. So I looked at three different things. First of all, I wanted to see if there are any indications for anadromy in our areas in the literature. I then did interviews with citizens. And lastly, we had a big electrofishing survey last spring. I'm going to present you the results here. So first of all, I did find several indications for freshwater spawning also in our areas. And also the melioration that I just mentioned was perceived as detrimental for the pike population during that time. Moreover, also the exploitation of pike seems to have been quite a common thing during old times when they migrate into shallow waters. And I have one citation here that I wanted to present you that I found in the literature, where it says, according to verbal reports, the pike were stabbed in shallow sidewaters like ditches and flooded meadows. They migrate into these zones in spring for spawning. At that time, the fish are rather lazy, hence catching them this way was relatively easy. And then you have this nice illustration on the right side. And this is quite interesting because therefore we possibly have also a good record of these spawning runs when the people were on the water trying to catch those pike. So I conducted overall 12 interviews with different kind of people. Most of them were anglers and fishers, but also some people from water management or fisheries authorities. And their knowledge covered all the bottom lagoons in our area. And they had actually all witnessed spawning runs into the freshwater systems personally. And also their reports covered all the bottom lagoons that we have in our areas. They reported different freshwater bodies to function as spawning habitats, so streams and ditches, but also wetlands and flooded meadows. And along with the literature that I just presented, also this hunt for the spawning pike was quite common back in the days, and particularly the older participants from my interviews, they were able to show me some of the gear they used. So not only pike forks were actually used for that, but also this kind of sling construction where you're then able to pull the pike out of the water. You see here one of the wetlands or a little lake that was mentioned by several interviewees to have functioned as a spawning habitat back in the days. On the left side before melioration, and it's connected to the bottom on the very left of the image through this little canal here. And on the right, you see the same place after melioration. And here's this little pump shed where there is this drainage pool and then water is pumped out into the bottom. And one interviewee reported on exactly this place. They migrated into that lake until the barrier was built. At the time, all hobby fishermen stood there and caught bags full of pike with their hand nets while the fish jumped. When the water was pumped into the bottoms in spring, the pike tasted it. So they jumped up but didn't get through because there was a grid. And I found this quite impressive. I actually heard several such stories from different interviewees on different sites, but they all dealt with this, this occasion that the pike actually tried to jump over these pump sheds somehow, desperately trying to get into their spawning habitats, and that they would then sometimes jump on land in front of the people's feet and they had to throw them back into the water. So this really indicates how strong this drive of the fish is to get into these water bodies. You see a little map of the water bodies that were mentioned during the interviews of the people, differentiated by whether they had witnessed it themselves or whether they had heard it from their fathers, their grandfathers, or other people. And we see that it's spread all across modern lagoons. To the east, we have less observations, but that's simply because I had less interviewees from that area. Last thing we did is we did an electrofishing survey. We've sampled 5 coastal streams in a weekly manner from the period beginning of March until mid-April this year. So overall 7 sampling weeks. And in each stream and week, we sampled 600 meters of transect. The total length that we looked at in each stream was different and was chosen depending on the local conditions as the stream width and length. And you see those different sampling streams geographically. We have one additional river here in the very east, and at the Pirna estuary, the river Ziese. We only sampled here at 3 occasions, but I will present the results of that nonetheless. And just to give you an impression, for example, here, this is River Serobach. It's the main river on the island of Rügen with an average width of 6 meters. We had also some additional sampling effort in that river because we needed to get samples from that locations. So next, this is Neuendorfer Hechtgraben, which actually translates into the pike ditch of Neuendorf. The stream was recommended to us by some of the people who had witnessed spawning runs here. And it's ridiculous because the depth here was only 0.2 meters. And we did not really expect much to happen here, but we will see. And this is Kirkwitzerbach, the largest study river with about 10 meters. So you see that there's quite a variety of different freshwater bodies we looked at. This is the catch per unit effort over the progressing season. On the x-axis, you have the date. And the box plots indicate the mean CPUE for all rivers combined per sampling week. In the background, you see the temperature curve from the water temperature of these water bodies. And you see that at the beginning of April, when the water temperatures reached about 7 or 8 degrees, we really see this increase that we kind of expected when we think of anadromy. And then at the end of the sampling season, already the catches started to decline again. This is the same picture split up by the different streams. And we see this same pattern holds true for most of the rivers investigated. However, there are a few exceptions. On one hand, we have River Big here on the very left. We caught only 5 fish overall, and we did not really see an increase of somehow. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that at Neuendorfer Hechtgraben, this little pike ditch that I just mentioned, the catches were quite high at the very beginning of the season already. However, if we would take only the larger pike above 30 centimeters into account, then we would see a very similar pattern here. We had a few large fish in the beginning and then it increased. This is just to show you what the different lengths split up by sex look like and the sex ratios. overall 3/4 of the pike caught at Neuendorfer Hechtgraben were actually smaller than 30 centimeters. But at the same time, we caught the largest fish in that same ditch. So we had 3 fish over 1 meter, and the largest one was actually 1 meter and 12. And that was kind of unexpected for all of us. This is just to show you that there was some interesting within stream spatial patterns. That for Zerobach, we had different sampling efforts. So not only the standardized 600 meters, but at some occasions we catched more here. We sampled more, and then that's indicated by the size of these black dots here. And you see that in that period when the catches really peaked, it wasn't equal throughout all the different reaches, but you have here on the y-axis the lower reach, the middle reach, and the upper reach. And you see that the high catches really only occurred in the lower reaches, which is one reach is about 1 kilometer in that case. So there's some spatial preference. Can we say that this is clearly anadromy, just that we have increased catches? There is one potential bias, namely if you sample in that stream, we mainly sample the shoreline areas, and particularly in that larger rivers. You may find the pattern that even the resident pike, they move into the shallow zone as the water becomes warmer. However, we did have recaptures from Zerobach and also from Neuendorfer Hechtgraben in the open bottom lagoons that were reported to us from fishermen and from anglers, which really show that these pike that we caught during the spawning period then later on moved out into the bottoms and are not resident fish, most likely. Also, my colleague Felici looked at some telemetry data from Zerobach, and here just to give you a small impression, this is during the spawning season, you see that they somehow migrate from all over the bottom into this little estuary here. This is the location of Zerobach, and then for the rest of the season, they spread out and live in the bottom lagoons. And I think this also illustrates that we may are dealing with anadromous behavior here. Also, our colleagues from the Uni Osnabrück, Arne Nolte and Stefan Dennmoser, they looked at genetic patterns of these samples. And they built this genetic distance tree. I tried to illustrate here a little bit. Geographic proximity is the same colors. And all those sites here that have a blue circle around it, those are rivers with the adjacent bottom. And we see that geographic proximity does not necessarily translate into also genetic proximity, and therefore this might be another indication that we're actually dealing with potentially anadromous subpopulations here in these rivers. Yeah, in summary, I guess we can say with all these combined data sources, we see that anadromy is quite widespread across the bottom lagoons, also in Germany, and that even the really small water bodies that may have previously been neglected in those assessments where, it is obvious that we have relatively few major rivers, but if you look at the really small water bodies, then there are quite a lot, and they also do serve as spawning habitats, apparently. Moreover, we found that not all streams apparently are used for spawning, as indicated by River Big, where we have no increase. Something that might be disputable, but these really high catch rates of very small pike in Neuendorfer Hechtgraben, they might indicate that these ditches actually potentially function as nursery habitats for the pike or as juvenile habitats. However, we did not sample outside of the springtime, so we don't really know whether those were very early arrivers or whether they lived there throughout the year and then at some point move into the bottom lagoons. Also, it became quite clear that this melioration, this landscape modification, was quite detrimental on the pike population, or at least on the anadromous stocks, and potentially reduced the anadromous pike stock size, which may go along with a loss in the overall stock resilience. Yeah, I want to thank all the people that were involved in this project, without whom this wouldn't have been possible. Thank you to the entire field team, to technicians, to the interview partners that took their time from me, and also to the funders of this project. And that was it from my side. Thank you for listening. If there are any questions, I'm of course happy to answer them.